G'day everybody, how's it going this week? Well, on this channel, I had played a video game named Mutant Year Zero, Road to Eden. It was a video game that was a tactical third-person shooter, utilizing a sort of tactical RPG element, similar to the old XCOM games, with probably a far less fatality rate than the old XCOM games. With main characters in which you evolve over time over the course of the story to give better abilities, and you get into larger and more difficult scenarios fighting robots and mutants in the wasteland in the wastes lands of the Netherlands. As I come to find out, that's where Mutant Year Zero sort of takes place. So interestingly enough, with that, there was a lot of combat involved in that particular storyline, and the game in and of itself is very interesting and very much a probably basically problem solving in combat situation. I really like how they had you set up the situation more than just kind of like. In like the XCOM games, you kind of get thrown into a situation. It's like you guys got your territory, they got their territory, and there's not much setup you can do beforehand. I did like the premise of being able to scout around and sneak around, trying to remain undetected, and then trying to figure out a good way to set up before you try to ambush your opponent. I do like that element of the game. And it made for very interesting situations, whether you succeeded or failed at, setting things up properly. Could have a big outcome on how the combat turned out. That being said, it did make me interested in the tabletop game that it was based on. In the loading screens for that particular video game, you would see like these dice with like biohazard and radioactive symbols on it, and there's just a standard D6. So the interesting thing about that, as far as the game goes, is that you can play it with more standard D6s, and I did pick up one of these books in order to kind of read how this kind of game goes, and I particularly read one expansion of them that seemed very, very anthropomorphic centric, which is Mutant Year Zero Genlab Alpha. So Mutant Year Zero, there's the standard edition, which revolves around the arc just like the video game did. The video game sort of revolved around this central arc thing, and basically you were going out searching for this character named Hammond, who basically was who had left the arc and had sort of vanished and disappeared, and your kind of main objective is to sort of rescue him, but you also find out other things along the way as you go to rescue him, and you go try to find what's called Eden, which is this like mystical place where it's very mysterious, and basically, your journey ends you up going to Eden, and you find out something very interesting. I won't do any spoilers here, even though during my playthrough, I did figure out sort of the direction that the story was going before it hit its end point. I basically figured it out while I was traversing the city to get to Eden. I'm like, wait a minute, seems kind of weird. But other than that, it was a very solid game. I really enjoyed it. So it did make me curious on the tabletop version. And the funniest thing is that when I read this tabletop version and I read through the mechanics of the game, I was absolutely surprised on how completely different it is than the video game counterpart. In fact, it's so different that its main premise is not really combat oriented. The video game is very combat oriented. It's basically preparing for your next fight against particular elements, and then it's basically a series of combats to get to your final objective. This game, however, this tabletop game, puts more of an emphasis on the social aspect of the game rather than on the combat. Which, for many tabletops, it's kind of interesting in that way, because there's a lot of combat-centric tabletops where it's like, preparing for these epic fights and things like that, where this doesn't seem to be that way. In fact, experience points seem to be earned on a merit basis as opposed to a combat basis. Whereas, like, you might defeat a monster in a particular game and then you get experience for it. In this one, it's did you make it to the session? You get some experience points. Did your character accomplish like a goal towards their big dream? Like your character, you give your characters dreams, and like if they're moving towards that goal in a positive way, then like the person can give out experience points based on that. There's other, like obviously combat and related things you can also give experience for. But interestingly enough, the character emphasizes what the character's dreams are as their character in this world, rather than going off to some big primary objective. Not to say that there isn't an overarching story in this book. It very much has to deal with. I think the best way I could kind of explain it to you is sort of a sort of mixture of Sonic Saturday AM with what's that thing? Oh, what's it called? The frickin' oh my god, I can't remember the name of it. It's gonna kill me. But basically, Sonic Saturday in that like you have these animal characters which are living in this place where there's these other group of people where like the main antagonist called the like overseers or some overwatchers or something, and they're basically like these advanced technology guys who are like doing scientific experiments on the animals within this sort of in this sort of zone, as it were. In this zone here, it's sort of written out for you, sort of the way that the zones are set up. You have different animal habitats that are like across different particular regions, and you basically have character sheets, and your playable characters can choose which kind of animal they want to be, and they go through and you develop stories based around those animal characters. And there's you're kind of like in this cage. Like this whole thing has like a fence around it at the very bottom there. You got this big old fence. You got a big, beautiful wall down there. And like the fences are extremely well, the outer fences are extremely well things. They also have like little inner fences that are sort of like spread out amongst the inner areas. And basically the whole entire concept is that this entire complex is overwatched by particular bad guys who I forgot their freaking names, which is sad. Watchers. They're called Watchers. By the way, watch me on FA. But they're called Watchers. So, like, these Watchers are very they're mostly machines, but they also do like experiments, and like they try to keep these animals in with an iron fist, and they use like sort of fear tactics and things like that. Very suppressive fear tactics. The general story arc is that like there's this growing resistance movement within the complex, and that the animals are becoming very wary of being held in this cage. Some of them like think that this is a test. The interesting thing is that this whole society, just like in Mutant Year Zero, there's this whole thing about the society that came before, and it's obviously hinted at that the human society that we live in today is a society that's seen as like this weird old times, and like sort of have sort of religious sort of emphasis on it. The same world exists within this game space, where the previous individuals in this world are seen as the humans, and like they treat them as sort of like godly figures, right? And like some people are like, well, the gods want us to listen to the Watchers, and if we obey the Watchers, then we're going to transcend, and we're going to become better. Well, this other group of people is like, no, we need to fight because we need to prove ourselves to the humans that we can defeat these Watchers that have put their thing on it. And sort of, so there's like two conflicting ideologies within the animal groups about what way to go into. The premise of the story is that the resistance starts to pick up momentum, and that eventually you get caught up in the whole conflict. So, and likewise, when you're dealing with social-political sort of issues, you start off with having individuals in groups that are have different sort of positions in the conflict. The two converse ones are the rabbits who exist in the far, far, far north east here, if going right is east. I don't know. But these guys up here are very, very much against the Watchers. They're very much... their society is somewhat enabled into the rebellion, right? And so they're very much into creatures that are, fighting it out. But their habitat also sort of shows that. Their habitat has some scars because the Watchers aren't being nice to them because so it's like the Watchers aren't showing the rabbits any niceties because those Watchers are like getting angry at the rabbits. So you can see like battle scars and things like that in their territory. Meanwhile, in the other side of the territory here, you got the wolves, or the dog characters, right? The canine characters. And stereotypically, canine characters and dog characters are seen as very loyal. And likewise here, the dog characters are very loyal to the Watchers, or the Watchers have them very much convinced that, to cooperate with them. And they have a very nice, compared to many of the other habitats, they have a pretty nice cabin. They have, good amenities, things like that, because the Watchers are, kind of bribing them or being nice to them because they're working in symbiosis. So, you have this interesting sort of world that they have developed here that you could kind of play with, in a way. And your characters are going to be going on this adventure to kind of find out the truth about the valley and what is actually going on and where these Watchers came from and all this other stuff. So I won't go into spoilers, obviously. But the interesting thing about the animal characters is that, obviously when you're talking about tabletop RPGs, the absolute idea in my mind between playing a tabletop RPG and playing a video game is that the video game has very strict defined rules, mostly because it was tailor made for a specific thing. Whereas you really can't put a tabletop game into video game form because it's more about improvisation and things that in situations arriving that make things interesting. Right? It's not like the game is programmed in a certain way. This has. It has a very pretty rigid story, but you can have a lot of fun with figuring out ways to tweak things. For instance, it's you have these basically main animals, which you have bears, rats, reptiles, apes, dog, canine, wolves, things, badgers, the felines. What else do we got? I think... Oh, yeah, and you have elk. Elk and deer and the other sort of forest dwelling larger animals. Interestingly enough, they don't have a habitat. They're just kind of spread across the wilderness. They're kind of roguish, and they live off the land. They don't really settle down into one place. The second closest to that I think was the bears. The bears also sort of have this very they have a habitat, but it's very sparsely populated, and they tend not to be dwelling in one place at one time. Whereas the rats are very more tightly knit, they'll be more clustered, and they have a pretty full habitat and things like that. And this book actually goes into cool little details about the habitats and things like that. And I guess I could turn to one of those pages while describing them. So you have a map. You sort of have a map of the places that these items take place in, and you have. The art in this frig is freaking cool, man. This is very nice art. So it really shows the things, and obviously your animal can have different classes as well. It's gonna take a good hour or two of reading, hour or two or 3 or 4 of reading if you wanted to get into the full details about these things, just like they normally do. But the interesting thing about it is that as long as you improvise properly and act reasonable, the game is not necessarily too punishing to beginners. Other skills. So you have roles you can play, right? So you have the scavenger here. And basically There's four main attributes that your characters have. You have your wits, your strength, your agility, and I can't remember the fourth one. You have agility, which is what the hunter uses. You have wits, which is what the scavenger uses. You have strength, which is like what your warrior classes would use. And you have instinct. Instinct is the fourth one. So this is sort of what a character sheet looks like here. So you lay out what your character's big dreams are and what their stats are, what they're carrying and other things like that, and there's rules behind that. Interestingly, in this game, there's the four stats. You take four different kinds of damage, and different situations can make you take damage to that particular stat. Like, for strength, you have damage, which is physical damage to yourself. For agility, you have fatigue. So if you're worn out, then your agility stat's going to be affected. For your wits, you have confusion, and for your instinct, you'll have doubt. Right. So you can take damage that can inflict harm on particular stats. Particular roles, like in most of these things, will have particular stats. Like you have seers that like instinct. Like seers are people that can like predict the future and sort of like your wizard / shaman class. Agility is for your hunters, like the people who are really, really fast and agile. That's sort of their main stats. And so, you make a character that sort of revolves around it. You can have your character be young, middle-aged, or old. Basically, you have like skill points and you have attribute points, and those four are the attribute points that I just stated. So you can have like a young character who's got a lot of attributes, right? They have a lot of strength. They're young. They're resilient. They have a lot of instinct. They have these attributes, but they don't have a lot of skill points. So they don't know how to do skills as much as they do. Like you have skills like endure, force, fight, move, sneak. Those are basic skills. Things like that. And so you have skills that you could pick for your characters, and you can really flesh them out. Just like any tabletop, takes a long time to sort of get, it's going to take you a few hours just to get that part set up. But obviously the setup could be worth it if the DM does their job properly, obviously. And that's probably one of the more difficult parts, obviously, is getting a DM that can get you immersed in this world. I think furries would really like this story, though. As I said, it's like Saturday... what's the frickin'... I still don't know it yet. I will get to it. What is it called? I'm going to Google it while I'm talking, because I know it's on the tip of my tongue, but I'm just going crazy. I'm going to laugh when I do it. So it's like Sonic Sadam, in which the Watchers are sort of like... They sometimes, and this is why I sort of thought it was a Sonic Sadam, is that some animal characters, can sometimes be captured by the Watchers. And then they come back and they become tainted because the Watchers like instill upon them like attributes that normally aren't supposed to be part of their dynamic. Like they install like these little robotic parts on them or something. And most of the animals see them as like second-class citizens because they've been tainted by the Watchers. Like it's an extreme sort of form of punishment. But in exchange, like they usually get an ability of some description. Usually one that's not really tied within basically a Mutant Year Zero. There's the Mutant Year Zero game, the main game, and that has its own ability charts. So you can sort of implement those abilities into this game. Apparently, I don't have the main Mutant Year Zero game. Anyways, I don't even know what I'm looking for. Tributes. They were called tributes. Tribute in fiction. Yeah. Anyways, and that's gonna drive me nuts. It's that stupid frickin' popular frickin' movie with the frickin' tributes and like putting them into the Hunger Games, motherfucker. God, okay, that's it. It's like putting them into these games and doing that thing. Okay, whew, it's warm out. My brain's like, oh, it's sort of like Hunger Games meets Sonic Sadam. All right, that's, I guess that if you want a general synopsis of the plot, it's sort of a combination of those two things. Oh my god, wow. I'm like, it's some sort of game, and oh yeah, Hunger Games, that's it, that's the name of it. Jeez Louise. Spoken like a true capitalist, you don't even know what the Hunger Games are, man. Anyways, I'm leaving that in, because I love not knowing things and then going, oh yeah, that's what it was, dummy. Obviously, there's like a bunch of stat stuff about what weapons you can carry, the distances that they're effective at for combat purposes. One of the things that's fascinating about this game, when I said that the original video game was more XCOM-esque, right? Was it XCOM-esque? XCOM-ish. The interesting thing is that XCOM has a lot of death in it. Like, you can't get too attached to your soldiers because they could die. And that's something you learn very quickly. When you first play it and you're like, oh, that guy just died. And it's like, oh, well, I need more soldiers, please. Poor Frank. We all knew him so well. But the aliens just decided to burst his guts onto the floor. And then there were... it was very bad. Interestingly, even though I said this book, this sort of roll top thing is not very combat focused, there is death and dying. And so one of the biggest things I would suggest is that if you're going to have people play this game, have some backup characters ready. Because there is possibilities that your character could die. And so here is a list of when they take vital damage on what can happen to them, depending on what they roll. Like basically they can when they're taking mortal physical damage, it can be as little as non lethal as losing their breath, as a like gaining an injury, right? You can lose your breath and kind of get the wind knocked out of you. You can become stunned, which doesn't do any damage. You could sprain your wrist, which will hurt you in your fight ability and your shooting ability. And those are just kind of the minor injuries. They go up to crushed skull, which is like the worst one you can roll, which is if you roll 2 6s. And you die instantly and will never experience freedom. That is the description that you get. So characters can die. Just be aware, and because of that, you have to be mindful that your playable characters are going to be things that your thing is. You spent a good deal creating this character, right? Now, vital injuries like that are pretty rare. That's like really, really, really bad luck, right? Most injuries have a healing time, and like you can go to a doctor and have a doctor heal it, right? You can kind of do that, but sometimes if you get really unlucky, your character is going to die if they are not careful. So how you would deal with that as a DM is, you have all these other characters that you're going to be introducing as non-playable characters. Have a stat sheet or two for these characters that you're introducing. And if one of the characters basically gets offed, right? You could say, well, here are some characters that I had introduced early on. Did any of them strike your fancy? And I can work them in, and you can play as that character from then on out. You can get if your character ends up being crushed or harmed in any way, shape, or form, then basically you can introduce a new character, right? And you can have them do it. Or you could tell them, it's like, make a backup character just in case, and we can introduce them as a side character. That way it gives them a little more agency over it as well. It's like, especially if they're indecisive, it's like, man, I really like to play this character, but I really want to play this character. It's like, well, make both characters, and then we can, like, if something bad happens to your primary character, we can put it in. Because not only do they have a chance of dying, they have a chance of being overcome by their animal side, which I think is a very interesting concept that a lot of furries will enjoy. Is that there are certain animal powers that your character can have depending on like what your species is, and they're based upon particular attributes that species might have. Like bears have huge, or like bears and the elks, or and the rats and the rabbits have like a small ability, and like that where they can like climb through and do things and that other characters can't do. Tail, warning call, sixth sense, predator, poisonous bite. So like they go through a bunch of abilities that you can have, and those are species based mostly. So if you're creative as a DM, like for instance, rabbits, like kangaroos, like how do you introduce kangaroos? Well, you can't really. If you were to solidly follow the rules of the book, kangaroos are obviously very foreign to this area, because I think this still takes place in sort of the Nordic area. But the closest I can find is rabbits. But rabbits have certain animal abilities that wouldn't quite work with a kangaroo. They have the ability of small, and they have the ability of burrow. And kangaroos don't really do either of those things, so you would remove those. But you can add tail, because tail has to utilize utilizing their tail to increase balance and powers of jumps and things like that. So you can use your tail in order to use it as a balancing thing. That's your animal power with that. And you could add that as an option for the kangaroo. So you'd pick animal powers as you go along, and that would be your options as a kangaroo character in my mind if I were DMing it. It's like, oh, you want to be a kangaroo character? You have the rabbits. You have the pool that rabbits have. You don't get burrow. You don't get small, but you have tail. That's the exchange. So you lose 2 ability of options and you gain 1, right? So you take somewhat of a punishment for being a non-standard character. And so like you can work with that and do what you need. That's the difference between having a DM that's sort of creative and can sort of, look at the rule sets and go, what's going to make or break the game, right? Is it like some purists would be like, no, you can't add root character. Root character's not allowed. It's not in the book. But if he's like, okay, if I can like look at the rules and create am I really breaking the game to a degree that it's not playable anymore? And so like working within the confines and things like that, you can kind of find these little compromises. For instance, like this game would work really well with having multiple DMs. If you wanted to make it epic, right? You could have like a group of people who are dogs and a group of people who are like bears and a group of people who are like rats, and get a bunch of furs together and have them each have their own DM, and then have like a DM that's sort of playing the watchers as the bad guys, because the idea is that the DM in the standard game is playing as the watchers and trying to move them around the board while they're playing the game. And so it's interesting that and then you would try to get your characters together in a party and do that. That's sort of the traditional style of playing it. But I see if you get really nerdy about it, you could like get an overseer DM and like little subset DMs that would like each have their own like little territory, and like they would each have their own little band of characters that would play, and then like every once in a while you may have a crossover. And then get together and have like a larger thing. That obviously the more people you have, the more complex it gets, because people have lives. But if you have clever DMs and things like that, you can figure out ways to implement individuals into the story and keep the story going in a way that makes it fun for everyone. Obviously, the more people you have, the more difficult it gets. But I could see, like, if you wanted to go really crazy, like, you can do, like, something that large. And even then, even though there is a main plot about trying to find a way out of the frickin', it's basically trying to find a way out of the cage. That's the biggest thing of the story. But as I said, like, that's just a sort of scratching of the surface of this particular game. It sounds interesting in that, like, I'm very not fond of the combat focused RTSs too much, or not RTSs, tabletops. I'm not too fond of them. I don't get too crazy about them because sometimes it's like it's all about the loots and the kills, and I'm not that kind of gamer. I like the social aspect of it. I like having I like sort of having it be a social thing as opposed to like a number crunching kind of thing. And while this thing does have its numbers, it's very much a simplified system. There, you can play this with just D6s, and unfortunately I had moved all my dice. I had it here ready to go, but I had moved them. But basically, you could just take a standard thing of D6s and use them. There are special dice that you can get with the game, or you can buy for the game. But they're basically D6s that have like the 1 and the 6 symbol replaced with a biohazard symbol and a radioactive symbol. The way that the game works, it's sort of, I think Risk sort of uses the rolling system where it's like how many successes and how many failures you have are based on the number of rolls. Like if you, the more skill points you have on it, the more dice you roll, right? If you're more apt in that particular thing, you get to roll more dice, and the more dice you roll, the more chances you have to succeed. And each success is a 1d6, landing on a 6. So for every 6 you get, you land a critical success. For every 1 you get, you have the opportunity for what's called a critical failure. Critical failures don't count towards anything unless you try to what's called push a roll. So how to describe this is, I have to roll 4 dice to lift off this. Let's say there's this heavy item, like cover on this bunker. Let's say there's a heavy door to a bunker, and I have to roll a strength check for my character, and my character's decently strong, so I've got 3 dice. I'm going to roll those 3 dice. Those 3 dice come up as numbers 1 to 6. Interestingly enough, 2 to 5 doesn't mean jack nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Only things that count towards anything or any importance are 1s and 6s. If you roll a 6, then you succeeded. It doesn't matter how many 6s there are. You roll any of your die that you just rolled are a 6, you succeeded. If you roll a 1, if you don't succeed, it doesn't mean anything unless you try to what's called push the roll. Push the roll means you roll again, but you leave on the table any die that are 6s or 1s. In combat, you might want to push it more because you're going to have an adversarial roll. So you might get worried about somebody being able to block the damage that you did or being able to like counter what you did. So you usually don't push the roll in a non-adversarial situation, like lifting that heavy thing, because the thing is not going to roll against you. That's more like if you're fighting somebody. So if you fail at lifting that lid, and you roll no 1s or 6s and you push the roll, you basically roll again, free. And then if you get a 6 then you succeed. But if you push the roll and you get a 1, then bad things start to happen. And I can't quite remember the rules behind it, but it's basically like you start spraining yourself, you get some sort of injury, like that will adversely affect you. There's some sort of punishment for the failure. And the book says, it shouldn't be just like, oh, you failed at that point. Like failure with a pushed roll, with a 1 rolled, is basically like you need to do some harm to them because they pushed it. Like maybe they get a hernia or something, or maybe they get some sort of injury. They'd have to roll for the injury, right? Like do they get a sprained wrist, or do they get a hernia, or like how is like how much physical strain do they put pushing that roll? Because pushing the roll basically means you're giving it your all. You are putting your whole force into this. If they succeed and they get a pushed roll failure, like you can do like, oh, they rolled a 6 and they rolled both a 6 and a 1 on the push, right? So they succeeded in opening the lid, but they also had a critical failure. So when they ripped open that lid, they flew back into a ditch and sprained their ankle, right? Like there's a ditch that was just happened to be right behind this lid that you're trying to open. and you step back, and as the door flies open, the door hits you in the face, right? Like there's some sort of inertia whiplash, right? So you can kind of create some interesting scenarios based on the results of the roll. That's not just like, was it a 1 or a 20, then something interesting happens. It's like you can kind of be creative with how you do that. And obviously there's certain rules about like certain things that would happen at certain times, which you can read about. I won't bore you with the details on that. But basically that's how it works. You can use standard D6 die. You don't need a D20, you don't need a D4, you don't need any of those fancy DMD dice. You can literally buy like a bunch of I would recommend different colored dice. Having different colored dice, because there are like different things like agility rolls, strength rolls. There's there's equipment rolls. That there are equipment that you can use, and those equipment get their own set of dice. If you roll a damage dice on that when pushing the rolls for those, then you can do damage to your equipment. Things like that. So mechanically, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty simple. It's got a lot of little nuanced rules that you could read into if you want, and having a good sort of general idea as to sort of how those rules work can make better interactions between the player and the DM. It's a social thing, right? The rules are written. It's how you implement them to have the most fun is the most important thing. But anyways, I've rambled on about this particular game and all. So I don't know if you wanted to buy it, it's not a cheap book. It was like $40. But there's a lot of content in here. Obviously, there's a lot of cool like art in it. That for sure. Just even like as a piece to sort of look at, like it's got a lot of cool designs and arts in it, and like very 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 well crafted. They try to the way they write it to try and make it as clear as possible. They do have some strength and they do have some weaknesses to it. I think they decided like they wanted to use the DM as a she, and then players' characters would be a he. And they tried to establish those as the pronouns for it early on, so that way it wouldn't be confusing if they say he or she. Whenever they are saying he, they're referring to a play character or a character playing, and whenever they say she, they're referring to the DM. I think they accidentally like flubbed it like once or twice, where they accidentally used the wrong pronoun. For that purpose, and they state that early on in the book is like that's how they wrote it, so that way those things would be distinguishable from one another. But it's an interesting world. It's an interesting scenario, and I think a lot of furries would enjoy adding that to their tabletop repertoire if that is their thing. I don't play too many tabletops myself. I am familiar with their rule sets and all that other stuff. I study game mechanics and things like that. As sort of a nerdy hobby more than I do engage in it. Sort of like somebody who knows what a first down in football is without ever picking up a pigskin. You know what I mean? I'm that kind of nerd. I'm like, yeah, I know what football is. It's like I know what a first down is. I know what a safety is. I know what an offsides kick is, or whatever. Wait, is that a thing? It's been a while since I've looked at the rule sets of football. American football. I don't know if I've ever looked at the rule sets of foreign football, but foreign football's pretty simple. It's like kick ball, hit it in goal. Good job. American football is like, a lot of people like say, oh, I like American football. It's so physical and things like that. But it's like, my God, the number of rules and like stipulations on when you could jump up and catch a ball and when you can't catch a ball is like, oh my God, the bureaucracy, man. It's like, oh, it's so simple. There's no bureaucracy. Have you ever seen American football? My God, that's a bureaucratic nightmare. This guy was pass interference. It's like, how does that work? Oh, he got in the way of the guy who was trying to catch the ball. I thought that's what they're supposed to do. No, they can't push the guy. They can't force the guy by tackling him before he catches the ball. They can only try to touch the ball. That's how it works. Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense, because pre-tackling if you could just tackle an individual who's about to catch a ball before they catch the ball all the time, then that's all the people would do all the time, because that would work, right? So there's reasons for the rules. It's just like when you're talking about like at a basic level, people are like, what does that mean, right? It's like, oh. Anyways, nerding out about rule sets and stuff enough. But that's the whole reason for playing tabletop, right? Is to have rules so that everyone knows that they're following the same rules. The rules are basically there so you're not showing favoritism, right? That's the whole basis of it. Like, you don't want to, like, even though you, like, let's say you really like one of the people that you're playing with, like, really, really like them, like, you want to marry them someday, that you're not showing their character's bias, right? Because you're trying to be a nice guy. It's more like, no, this is what the rules say. And unfortunately, that's life, right? It's trying to emulate a bit of fantasy, but add realism to it. Particularly this one, right? And in fact, the most important quote in this entire book is that one of the most important quotes, and I probably should try to find it to close it out. It's early on in the book, but it was like probably one of the biggest things. Is basically it has to do with revolving around the animal characters. Let's see. All right, so I'm gonna finish you off with this quote. Playing a walking, talking animal would invariably make you laugh from time to time. That is perfectly fine, but don't create a playable character who is just a joke. Try to find a serious core in your character, even if it is a walking raccoon with a baseball bat and a trucker cap. The mix of humor and apocalyptic darkness is the essence of playing an animal in Mutant. So basically, what they do is it's more of an Aesop fable than it is a comedy, right? It's not. You're not trying to play Bugs Bunny. You're trying to play a character that is an actual, character, right? And that's an important emphasis they put on it. It's more of, there can be humorous moments. And by the way, there's a picture in here I gotta show you. Oh, it's so good. Let me go see if I could find it. I should have been more prepared and put things on it. But there's a cat in here with wearing an Iron Maiden shirt, basically. And I'm gonna see if I can't find it, because that's sort of like one of those funny moments. Because obviously they have little artifacts and things from the quote unquote old world that they can wear and things like that. So you can sometimes have here it is. Here it is. That character right there. Little cat feline character there wearing an Iron Maiden shirt. We're on a beer can. See, that's like the cat's still a character. They're wearing an Iron Maiden shirt, and that seems kind of weird, but it's at the same time it's like they might think it's some sort of like deity from the old worlds, the Iron Maiden. The Iron Maiden will come for us all one day. And then somebody thinks that it's some sort of bigger meaning or something. So you could kind of have a lot of fun with it and figuring out sort of how this world would play out with all these old human artifacts in it, and sort of tie in if you like Iron Maiden, if you like Iron Maiden as a person, it's my character's wearing this Iron Maiden shirt. They have no idea what it means. But they like it. They like that shirt. Anyways, I'm going to get the hop out of here. This is a long, rambling video, and I'm going to have to edit some of the parts because somebody knocked on my door while I was doing it, and I wasn't expecting that, but I had a package dropped off today. So, anyways, thank you very much for watching. Kick that like, kick the subscribe button, kick a comment in the comment section. Do you have any other tabletops that you like? Any ones with major anthropomorphic characters? I know all y'all like kobolds. Do you like kobolds? Of course you like kobolds. I know a lot of y'all like kobolds. Kobolds, man. Unfortunately, no kobolds. I guess that's one thing I guess Mutant Year Zero doesn't have. That's kind of disappointing. No kobolds. Man, I had them too. I had them until I said there were no kobolds. That kind of sucks. Why didn't they have kobolds, man? Why?